It's called the broken window theory. And if you're looking at the video, you're seeing a picture right now of a plastic bag, and it is over the top of a button for a lit crosswalk in Los Angeles, or around Los Angeles. My friend Chris Bray writes a great Substack, and he put this in his Substack. And what does this have to do with the Los Angeles fires? It has everything to do with the fires in and around Los Angeles. Chris will explain that to us next with the help of Bulwark Capital Management, KnowYourRiskRadio.com, and, of course, God Almighty.
The Todd Herman Show is 100% disapproved by big pharma, technocrats, and tyrants everywhere. No. From the high mountains of free America, here's the Emerald City exile, Todd Herman.
Today is a day the Lord has made, and these are the times through which God has decided we shall live. We continue to pray for the people in California, first responders who are doing what they do so well. God bless them and protect them. Chris Bray joins us outside of Los Angeles. Chris, welcome back. Glad that you're here, and I'm glad you're okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You told me there's some people from Idaho have come down to help. I want to talk about that. I know you're getting help from all around the world, but let's start right off with a picture of a plastic bag covering a button on a lit crosswalk, because this begins the tale of how you've been warning people about what happens with performative politics.
Yeah, so I live in a city. I live in a little suburban town called South Pasadena, 3.4 square mile town. Remember the size of the town, 3.4 square miles, about 27,000 people. That for years has been deeply engaged in the world. We have a climate action plan to fix the climate of war. When we debated our resolution condemning Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine, the city council sent it back to staff several times to rework it to make sure the resolution was properly worded so that the South Pasadena City Council firmly rebuked Vladimir Putin. We had a resolution against bigotry in November of 2016 for some reason. And on and on and on. We debated a ceasefire resolution in Gaza. And all the time we've been doing this, things have been breaking in the city. And one of them is the city, a long time ago, put in flashing crosswalk lights at crosswalks near things like schools and the library. And a few years ago, they started breaking. And when they started breaking, they put bags over the buttons that said out of service, so that people wouldn't mistakenly think that they could use the flashing lights in the crosswalk and cross. And then once they put the bags on that said, oh yeah, this is broken, that's just what they did.
The thing breaks and it can't be fixed.
It can't be fixed. There are these orange bags over all of these buttons that have faded because they've just been sitting there for years. And I see that all over the city. I see that in the streets. We have a bridge that cracked years ago, a concrete bridge. It's a pedestrian bridge, an old historical pedestrian bridge. And they put signs at the entrance to the bridge that say, bridges closed, unsafe conditions. That was 2 years ago. And there the signs said they're not going to fix the bridge. They're not going to do the safety assessment of the bridge that they said they would do. So we're very, very busy. The mayor of Los Angeles was in Ghana as the fire started.
Yes.
Doing cultural outreach. The mayor of my city, my 3.4 square mile suburban city, several years ago did a jazz outreach trip. She led a city delegation to New Orleans to research the French Quarter. We do that stuff, but when things break, nobody notices, nobody fixes them, nobody does anything about them. I have a street sign near my house that points one way is Raymond Hill and the other way is Columbia Street. And years ago it faded so that it doesn't really say anything anymore. It's a green sign with sort of what used to be the outline of letters. And if you squint at it really hard, you can make it out. But nobody's ever going to replace that sign. It's just going to sit there blank. And it's look upon my works, ye mighty, in despair. It's the poem about the statue in the desert surrounded by nothing. We don't fix anything. We don't do anything, but we're very very deeply involved in Gaza.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you are, because that's really helped over there. And Adam Schiff, you're fine not now. What senator? He had an update, Chris. I don't know if you've heard this yet. I'll share this with you in a second. Chris Bray's with us. There's a link to his Substack. I pay to read Chris's writing, and I gladly do it. And I would recommend you do it as well. It's just absolutely filled with wisdom. I use a product called Wisdom. It's a biblically based herbal blend. And I'm thrilled to tell you that my 20-year-old daughter loves this stuff, and I'm 57, and I love this stuff. It gives me a sense of calm. I know it's helping my immune system. I know it helps me with calmness and awareness, helps harness inflammation on your side. And it came about because Dr. Patrick Gentempo, who does a podcast called Christ Revealed, was walking through the Holy Land, smelling all these spices, reading about them in the Bible in almost a sacred way. Just this morning, I was reading David again about hyssop and being made pure with that. So he created this blend, applied scientific rigor. It is made in cold brew processing, small batches, and they lock in the potency with sound waves and light waves. And I take this stuff straight. Fantastic taste. My daughter puts it in her coffee throughout the day, and she has anxiety sometimes, so coffee's great for her, but not always. This gives her the coffee lift without the jagged edge. You can get this now. Go try Wisdom. TryWisdomNow.com/Todd. That's TryWisdomNow.com/Todd. You will get 33% off, free shipping, and 180-day money-back guarantee. That's TryWisdomNow.com/Todd. You may have seen this, Chris Bray, but your fine senator, Adam Schiff, who may well read your Substack and shudder in fear, he has come out and said that the reservoirs were in fact full. That it is apparently no, he did. He's on record this weekend on TV saying that the reservoirs were in fact full. And your governor, Newsom, has said that in fact he didn't cut the budget. That never happened for firefighting. So let's go through this bit by bit, from the bridge to the bag to the reservoir, which I heard you say, and I've never known you to spread this information, that it in fact was not full.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as people started saying, "Oh, that's a lie," the reservoir was full. Let's establish the context, which is that when the fire started burning in the Palisades, there are 3 water tanks in the Palisades with 1 million gallons each. And those had water in them. The firefighters had 3 million gallons of water. There's a reservoir right in the middle of Pacific Palisades that can hold 117 million gallons of water. And it broke. There's debate about this, but the city has acknowledged that it broke at least a year ago, that the cover of it broke, so they drained it to fix the cover, and they haven't fixed the cover, and they don't know when they're going to fix the cover, and they don't know exactly what's going on with it. Nobody can really say what it means, but that was empty when the fire was burning. So the firefighters ran out of water as the fire got bigger and people were turning on their garden hoses to put water on their houses. Pacific Palisades ran out of water, and then it burned. And the city is saying, the city said for a while, "Oh, it's not true. That's disinformation that the reservoir was empty." And then they acknowledged that the reservoir was empty. And journalists started walking. There's a guy from FT, Financial Times, who walked to the reservoir and looked at it and said, "It is empty. Here's a picture of it." So there's all of this debate about whether or not that would have mattered.
Whether 117 million gallons, or even half of it, or 10% of it would have mattered? This is debatable?
Would 117 million gallons of water have mattered in a place where firefighters ran out of water while it was burning? You know, it's a really obscure point. Who can say if water helps put out fire? There's a billionaire, there's a guy named Rick Caruso who has built a bunch of shopping malls in Los Angeles, and he owns a shopping mall in Pacific Palisades. And when the fire started burning, he started calling for water trucks, and he has private firefighters under contract. And he rushed a bunch of water trucks and a bunch of private firefighters to his shopping mall in Pacific Palisades. And this morning, and if you're from Los Angeles or you've been to Los Angeles, Palisades Village burned, which is like Mayberry RFD for rich people. It's a beautiful little sort of downtown area, like you're in a small town.
Yeah.
And I've spent a lot of my life there. It's a absolutely wonderful place, and it's gone.
Yeah.
With the exception of Rick Caruso's shopping mall. And, you know, people, this being Los Angeles, this being the land of Che Guevara politics, people started waking up and saying they're very, very angry that the billionaire saved his property. But what the billionaire did is, when a fire started, he got some water. And he got some firefighters and he sprayed water on buildings. So here we are saying, well, I don't know if an extra 117 million gallons of water would have helped.
There's instances, Chris, you've probably seen this, that there are families who saved their houses. One gentleman had a pool pump ready to go. The grandfather had said, you got to have this. They're on video simply spraying out hot spots. Another guy refused to evacuate, stayed behind by himself, and he had a very similar setup. He said, all I did was I'd see a spark land, I'd make it wet. And in this entire neighborhood, these two houses survived. But you're telling me there's actually people debating whether this 117 million, they're actually, and do they actually believe themselves? Like, what's that great phrase that J.D. Vance used? Do they hear themselves?
Do they hear themselves?
Yeah.
Google this up. Look for this. There's a surgeon in Malibu. The fire burned all the way down to Malibu and destroyed beachfront houses. There's a surgeon in Malibu who was in surgery, finished his surgery, drove home. And he had been thinking for several years that Malibu was going to burn again, because Malibu burns fairly often, and that the government wouldn't be able to, that the government was not well run enough to deal with it. So he started taking firefighting classes, and he bought turnout gear, and he bought firefighting hoses, and he bought pumps for the pools in the neighborhood. And when the fire came, he said to his neighbors, it's time. And they went and they started pumping water out of their pools. And his cul-de-sac of 6 houses in Malibu didn't burn, while everything around them burned.
Okay, but he's got to be some form of criminal.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
So think about this. I actually, all of these, they're all over liberal media now this week. There are all of these stories arguing, you can't blame government because there's nothing anyone could have done. Fire is a force of nature. The fires were so big, there were winds. There's nothing anyone could have done. And in the places where, like this surgeon fought for his neighborhood, Rick Caruso hired firefighters and got water and fought for his mall. In the places where people fought, things survived. So what is the role of government and what is the place of government? And a Los Angeles liberal, Karen Bass, would tell you, government is central to our lives. Government is a critical force for ordering our lives. If you question the power or the value or the role of government, or you try to limit it, or you talk about enumerated powers, you're being an anti-government extremist, because government is very, very important to us. And it makes the world more fair and more just and a better world. And also, there's nothing government can do in an emergency because
It
things
can't be done.
How could you expect the government to deal with this? So the very core, the dead center, the director of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which runs that reservoir that was empty when the fire started, makes $750,000 a year as a base salary to not fix the reservoir in the middle of the place that's burning that could have had an extra 170 million gallons of water. So government is very, very important, but don't expect it to help you. And I find reading all of these articles this week about, there's nothing that could have been done. Stop with your bizarre MAGA conspiracy theories about
firefighters and such
using water to put fire out. That's crazy talk. It's like watching a snake eat its own tail. Like, what do you mean? Government is here to help you. Government is very important. Government is impotent. Don't blame us. Of course, government couldn't have fixed this.
Incredible.
And I have to say, the personal experience I had, I not just describing to you things I've seen on the news or things that I got from other people, from talking to other people. A friend, I live in South Pasadena, which is down the hill from the fire that started in Eaton Canyon and burned an incredible amount of Altadena and burned into Pasadena. And I got a text message from a friend who lived in Altadena, who had a beautiful house there he'd owned for more than 30 years. And he texted me and he said, the house is gone, but I'm here. And he's a sculptor. He bends steel to make giant steel sculptures. So he has an enormous studio in his backyard that he uses to do all of this metal work. And he texted me and he said, the house is gone, but the studio's still here. Can you come and help me get things into the car? And I drove up to help him. And I had a really hard time getting to him because the sheriff's department was already closing off roads, and I kept running into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. So I was having to wind my way through little residential streets.
Yeah.
And I was driving through streets that were burning and houses that burned. I saw this burned to the foundation, and the foundations were still burning. The debris collapsed into the foundation, and the debris in the foundations were still burning. Probably 2 miles from the hills, maybe a little more, I started seeing houses burn. And people out in their yards where they still had water using garden hoses to try to keep their houses from burning, and no fire department, no firefighters anywhere, no fire engines anywhere. And as I got closer and closer, more and more buildings were burned. And again, like a post-apocalyptic landscape of driving through a place where everything is burning. There's no fire department. Everything that burns to the foundation. And I got to my friend's house, and all of his neighbors to his right and all of his neighbors across the street were gone, and the house to the left was just fine. And I helped him carry things out of his garage and his workshop. Next to he has a very old house that still has a basement, which not many houses in Los Angeles do, but his house collapsed into the basement, and all of the debris in the basement was burning. So we were walking past this, sort of ongoing fire in a pit, and all the neighbors' houses were down to the foundation, but they were still burning. Everything around us was still burning, except the house to the left. And we were there for maybe an hour loading things into the car. When he got there, he realized there was fire. His studio was still standing, but there was fire in the walls because there was smoke coming out of the walls.
Yeah.
So he called 911 and said, hey, my house is gone, but my workshop and my backyard and my garage are still standing. There's smoke coming out of the walls. Can you get someone here? And they said, no possibility. We have nowhere near enough people to send to you. And he turned on the garden hose and no water came out.
Oh.
But fortunately, the fence had burned. So when he walked out of the studio into his yard, he could see his neighbor's pool. And he ran over and got buckets of water from the pool, and he opened the wall with a sledgehammer and poured buckets of pool water into the walls and saved them.
Incredible.
So the experience of being in a place where everything is burning and the fire department isn't there is something I've never experienced and never imagined experiencing, but it was just a fascinating experience, just a surreal experience, and the strangest thing I've ever seen.
And for those of us who haven't been there, I mean, I've been to Pasadena. I've actually been to that mall you talked about, and I'd love to meet this surgeon you mentioned earlier, Chris. His name is Chester Griffiths. Went out and saved his home and planned to be an amateur firefighter at work as he knew what was coming. I want to ask you a real quick response on your assistant LA fire chief. The woman who explains that the primary concern of folks when they are trapped in a fire and their kids are near to burning to death is that you look like they do. So she wants to go rescue heavy, short-haired lesbian women, period, who happen to be black, by the way, but not men our age who might be trapped in a building because that's our fault. Plus, she's proud that she can't carry us. Is this going to be, Chris, honestly, do you think this is any sort of mental breaking point that might actually have people reflect on their votes? In other words, could this red pill anybody in California?
Oh, that's such, oh yeah. It's such a hard question and such a difficult thing to talk about. This assistant fire chief in Los Angeles said, people ask me, could you carry my husband out of a fire? And she said, if your husband is trapped in a fire, he got himself into the wrong place. We had that's maybe 20 years ago at this point, a teenager who committed suicide in Alameda up in Northern California by swimming out into the San Francisco Bay and drowning himself. And people saw him doing it and called 911, and the police department and the fire department came and stood on the beach and watched him drown. And eventually, a woman who was out taking a walk on the beach stripped down to her underwear and swam out and dragged his body in because the fire department and the police department wouldn't do anything about it. And it's, I used to work for local newspapers. I used to cover fire departments, and I can tell you that every firefighter I ever knew would say that the ethic of the fire service is, if you need us, we're coming. It's very, very hard to get to a point where, and I think in these fires that we just had, the problem wasn't that the fire department didn't want to do anything. The problem was that we didn't have enough firefighters, and they were out, frantically. The firefighters who were on duty were out frantically trying to put out fires, but there just weren't enough of them. The ethic of the fire service is, we're going to help you no matter what it takes. No matter how hard it is, we're coming. And so to see someone wearing a fire department uniform saying, don't expect me to carry out of your house, you just shouldn't have gotten yourself there, I think is a replacement of one ethic with a radically different and incompatible ethic.
Yep.
If people can't notice that, we're not going to fix it. Now, the question of whether or not they can notice it, you immediately start getting, I've seen this over and over and over again for years. Saw this during COVID, don't be ridiculous. Of course, a mask stops COVID. Of course it does. Anthony Fauci says so. So how can it possibly not be true?
Yep.
You start immediately immediately hearing the phrase conspiracy theory.
Yep.
When you say things like, maybe if they'd had water, they could have fought the fire. That's what you're listening to, these online conspiracy theories. It's such a dramatic and astonishing failure. And Pacific Palisades, I did the math on this, about 5% of the city of Los Angeles, and we lost more than the Palisades. The fire burned a whole bunch of other cities. So we've lost more than 5% of the city of Los Angeles. If you lose an enormous portion of a major American city, does it force you to reconsider? Does it force its way through? Or does how much has to be destroyed before you're willing to say, maybe we should think about this? And
Absolutely right.
If your status anxiety and your feelings about, ultimately, if you say the government failed on this, Gavin Newsom failed, Karen Bass failed, Democratic run government in Los Angeles failed, and in California failed, it means that you're one of these MAGA people. Maybe you should move to a trailer park and fly over country, right?
Well, not to mention
meanings that are different than what it actually means in practical terms.
Yeah, not to mention the racism involved.
Right.
And the racism and the bigotry. And I want to get back, Chris, to infrastructure with you. And the website, by the way, Chris's Substack is chrisbray.substack.com. Again, it's linked in the show notes. And I want to go back to something else you wrote about, which was this nasty warning fire that happened and affected some infrastructure. We'll talk about this with Chris Bray, my very favorite Substack writer. I pay to read his writing. I suggest you do the same thing. He's a journalist we should really, really support and respect. My friend Zach Abraham, Chief Investment Officer, Bulwark Capital Management, someone I've grown to respect so much so that I gave him a whole boatload of money to steward. I tried to give him all our money, and he said, no, don't do that because I'm a risk management zealot. And what if I have a bad year, the year we retire? So balance that out. So he wouldn't let me do that. Any other fund would be like, yeah, well, give me all that plus your kids. So he doesn't play that game, Zach Abraham. He's fanatically focused on risk management. He's also, you hear him on our program once a week. He's a very keen, astute observer of what's happening politically and societally and culturally and spiritually. So he takes it all into account. He's doing his first live webinar, which is free in 2025, and he's really going to focus on the changes that President Trump's team is going to bring, what might happen to the economy, how the empire is going to strike back, and what this means for your retirement. If you're 5, 10, 15 years from retirement, you really need to make sure that you're calibrated for reality, because I'm here to tell you that many accounts are not. And Zach accomplishes this by actively managing every account, which can reduce risk and volatility so that you have only one retirement. So go get a second opinion. It's free to go to this webinar. It's Thursday, January 30th. Register now at knowyourriskradio.com. That's KNOW, knowyourriskradio.com. Get that second opinion on your retirement. You only get one retirement, so don't put this off. It's knowyourriskradio.com. Investment advisory services offered through Trek Financial LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Investments involve risk and are not guaranteed. Past performance isn't guaranteed. Future results, Trek 25-103. Chris Bray is with me. It's chrisbray.substack.com. And Chris, you wrote and took pictures of a very nasty fire that happens under a freeway. And this is shocking to anyone who's ever been in a city like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, but it apparently started with a homeless camp and some propane tanks. And people have seen you and others refer to this sort of as a warning fire that, hey, things might get bad. So can you remind us of that circumstance?
Sir, if you look at video of the I-10 freeway, there's so much video of this on YouTube of the I-10 freeway fire in November of 2023. You can watch firefighters spraying streams of water over homeless encampments, over tents, over these makeshift plywood buildings next to the freeway. And there were also illegal storage yards. There were a bunch of junked cars and a bunch of wooden pallets packed tightly underneath the freeway. And so when all of that burned, the rebar in the concrete became unstable. It melted and reformed and became unstable, and they had to rebuild the understructure, the foundation of the freeway to keep it from collapsing. So the I-10 freeway, the freeway through the middle of Los Angeles, was closed while they built what are called false works. I love that term. Underneath the freeway to hold it up.
False works. Okay.
And the same two idiots, it's so familiar. Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom stood on that freeway, on that closed freeway, and celebrated the good work they did rebuilding it. They said, what an amazing success. We've done an extraordinary job here, and look how good we are. And I've been watching the press conferences, like the LA County Board of Supervisors and the Los Angeles City Council, with the fire department and police department leaders and the sheriff's department leaders, all of these elected officials. And you can always watch my new state senator, always sort of gets her face in the frame behind the mayor. And the theme with the fire burning, with houses burning, the theme of their press conferences was, we're doing an extraordinary job.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
No, they did not. They did that?
Go to Karen Bass's Twitter account. Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles. This actually really fascinates me. She posted a video yesterday where she talks about the scope of the disaster and the pain and the suffering and the grief sweeping through Los Angeles. And she's smiling, an enormous, happy, warm smile. And it's captioned. So I've taken a screenshot that says, your grief and your agony underneath the smiling, the beaming face of a happy Mayor Karen Bass. The theme has been, we're doing a wonderful job. So things just happen, right? Like bad stuff just happens. You can't expect anyone to put out a fire because it's very obscure how you would do that. And if the reservoir was empty, that's, what does it even mean? But now we're doing a very wonderful job, and it's important that we not blame, and it's important that we not be negative. Now is the time. Karen Bass is very fond of the phrase link arms. We need to link arms and we need to stand together. And if you want an example of how ridiculous that can become, while the fires were burning, the California legislature convened a special legislative session.
Everybody stop. Everybody stop. Listen to what Chris Bray's about to tell you. Everybody stop. If you're listening in earbuds, if you're listening live, if you're watching later, if you're on YouTube, you stop and you listen and you look at Chris Bray tell you what happened in a special legislative session. Okay, Chris, sorry for interrupting, but this has to be absolutely clear to people.
At the moment, the biggest city in California was burning with an uncontrolled fire that we couldn't stop. The legislature convened a special legislative session to budget money to stand up to Trump. They created a fund for the Attorney General's office to sue Donald Trump and tie up his agenda in the courts. And then, as the legislative session ended, Gavin Newsom and separately the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors sent letters to Donald Trump inviting him in a spirit of friendship to come tour the fire zone so that he can help us when he takes office, so that he can help us with fire recovery. So the argument in California is that Donald Trump is literally Adolf Hitler. He's a fascist. He's a bigot. His election is the destruction of democracy. It's the end of our democracy. America is now an autocratic dictatorship, and democracy is dead, and Hitler rules. And also, come be friends with us. We'd like you to come tour our fire area so you can help us. So the rhetorical strangeness of people saying, as the city burns, we're doing a wonderful job, and I'm just so proud of how everyone is linking arms and standing together. And there's nothing, government is extremely important to your life, and government is central, and government is about helping. And also, there's nothing we could have done about the fires. And also, we're inviting literally Adolf Hitler to come be our friend and tour our burning city. If you look for any form or degree of logical order or sense or rationality in the discussion that our elected officials and our media, but our media by and large, although there were reporters, local reporters, who did not do this, our media by and large is rushing to say, California is well governed. There's nothing anyone could have done about this. Mm-hmm. Look for the successes. Don't try to blame. I will say 2 moments. There was a reporter reflecting the moment I had standing in Altadena watching an entire neighborhood burn, and for the hour we stood there, we didn't see the fire department. There was a reporter who said to Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Bass, I stood in a neighborhood in Pacific Palisades for hours. I drove around Pacific Palisades with my crew. We personally watched with our own eyes as hundreds of houses burned, and we did not see a single fire engine. Can you explain what happened? And Karen Bass said, I don't think this is the right time for that conversation.
I saw Gavin Newsom attempting to blame President Trump on a podcast. On the same podcast, he said, now is not the time for finger pointing. This is the same Gavin Newsom who stood next to President Trump in a forest that had burned. And President Trump, a Manhattan real estate developer, displayed more knowledge of how to not have forest fires than a guy who supposedly manages the biggest, like 8th biggest economy in the world with some of the most diverse forests and beaches and grasslands in the world. And they're blaming him. I have to ask you about one interaction I saw. I'm sure you've seen this, and we'll play this later this week, and you guys will see this. And let me ask you about this in a second, Chris. Someone this weekend did something really horrible at my house, and it pales in comparison to losing your house in a fire. Someone stole my magnesium breakthrough. So I'm looking for the person. We've got a series of security cameras. I think it may have been my wife seeking revenge on me for having woken her up the other night. And it might have been that she didn't. No, she's actually watching, so it wasn't her. Magnesium breakthrough is something I've talked to you about sleep. It's very helpful that way. It helps you fall asleep and stay asleep. That's my experience with it. I don't talk enough about how it helps manage anxiety and calm people down. It does this by managing the stress hormone cortisol. It also regulates 599 other body interactions. This is the thing I love about Matt and Wade, though. They never stop improving. They have reformulated magnesium breakthrough so that it is more dissolvable. I used to take it 2 hours before bed. Now I can take an hour before bed. It's also more bioavailable. So even if you've tried it, the 4.0 is better. You get 10% off. Go to bioptimizers.com/Todd. Use promo code Todd. Then take my tip on this. Subscribe. You'll never run out of products. Never, even if someone steals it, you can have a backup plan. I'm going to start storing some in my gun safe. Right? Oops, people found I have a gun safe. Now I'm in trouble. Bioptimizers.com/Todd, promo code Todd. 10% off. When you subscribe, you get free gifts, you get discounts, and you don't run out of product. Bioptimizers.com/Todd, promo code Todd. You probably saw this, Chris Bray, and it's chrisbray.substack.com. A woman wearing a mask, and I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt that she was wearing it because of the smoke, and that actually is really bad for your lungs, so I'm going to give her that benefit of the doubt. There's Gavin Newsom, who looked great. He looked really great. His hair was perfect, and there was a beautiful, shiny black SUV that didn't have any smoke or dust on it, and he was surrounded by security personnel. And she came up very politely, using the honorific, Governor Newsom, Governor, may I talk to you, please? And the security kind of stopped. She said, I'm not going to hurt him. I promise. I promise. And they kindly allowed her to approach the king. And she said, what are you doing? What are you doing to help? And he said, I'm literally right now, literally on the phone with the president, literally trying to get help. And she said, may I hear the conversation? Because I don't believe you. And Newsom said, well, that's why I'm walking around and I don't have signal. And so the first words out of his mouth was a lie. I'm literally on the phone with the president right now. And,
well,
and
let me,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I don't have a cell phone signal. Yeah.
Yep, right. Did you see this interaction?
I did.
Okay. Can you?
I actually started off. It was so painful to me to see it that I didn't make it through the whole. It's like a minute and a half, and I made about 30 seconds, and just couldn't watch his sociopathic lying.
So people have to understand something about Newsom, and this is so important in terms of what California's become. There's the Getty family, there's Newsom, there's Pelosi, and one other family. There's kind of four families who've controlled California forever. And this came to mind when I was listening to I was listening to a fire dispatch call. You may have heard this as well, that two firemen were arguing. Dispatch was saying we have a high priority historic building, and they were referencing the Getty Museum, and we need assets over there. And a heroic firefighter said, no, I can't apportion. I don't have enough men or a crew. No, I have family homes, etc. Can you talk through the historic power culture that is Gavin Newsom that surrounds him? And I mean, is that true? Are these four families who just rule over California?
That's so hard to, I mean, yes.
Yes.
But to me, there's so much more going on at this point that talking about the balance of power and talking about how Los Angeles works and how California works. To me, the families that have ruled California, like a personal fiefdom.
Yeah.
That's an important story, but one of the things that's happening to us before the last election, we have a legislator named Corey Jackson, who has a very important doctorate in social work.
I know this guy. I know. Yeah.
And Corey Jackson represents a kind of a purple district. He's out in the Inland Empire in a heavily Latino district that's probably politically liberal, but culturally at least somewhat conservative and very Catholic. And Corey Jackson authored a bill to ban book bans in school, he says.
Yes.
And it passed, and the governor signed it. And he and Gavin Newsom, did a video together about how proud they were that they'd banned book bans. And what that means in practice is that he made it illegal to not have sexually explicit curriculum materials in schools. He's very, very proud of this. You want 8-year-olds to have plenty of books about, so they can learn. And I started saying to the Republican Party, to the California Republican Party, I started emailing staff, the executive director of the California Republican Party, the political director of the California Republican Party, saying, for crying out loud, you can beat this person, get resources into this district, talk to your donors, get money to this district, contest this seat. And not only did they not do that, but they never talked to me. They never responded to me. I never heard from anyone. So part of what's happening in California is we have, I think, three things. We have the oligarchy of old families that you're talking about,
Yep.
unchecked. We have this growing Karenocracy of legislators who are former teachers and former social workers who have a vision of government not as a thing that provides service, but as a thing that changes society. And we have no culture of opposition. We do not have a Republican Party in California. We have no significant statewide Republican figure. We have a couple of Republican legislators who are outspoken, and a bunch of we have a handful of Republican legislators. The Democrats have a supermajority in both houses, but the few Republicans who get elected mostly just keep quiet and don't do very much. We have no culture of opposition in California. And we're not, I think, going to develop one in the near future. I think that's a generational problem. So the thing I'm hoping for in California, because there's not the Republican cavalry is not on the way in California. The thing I'm hoping for is people like Rick Caruso, the real estate developer who ran for mayor, and lost to Karen Bass, the biggest idiot on the face of the earth. I'm just astonished by that.
She was on the short list to be VP. Chris Braith, speechless. That never happens.
Man who makes a living with words runs out of words. It's like they were on a quest with the Knights of the Round Table to find the biggest idiot in the realm. And they didn't succeed. They only found the second biggest idiot. The only thing that I think can happen in California that can begin to produce even a tiny bit of health is the reemergence of a kind of centrist Democrat who's capable of actually running things. Los Angeles and California in the late 20th century were built by Democrats. Governor Pat Brown was a Democrat, but he was a centrist Democrat who built things, who made things, who made the government work at its basic function. Tom Bradley was a 5-term mayor of Los Angeles. He was a Democrat and a former LAPD officer, a career government employee, and he would not have casually said, well, there's nothing government could have done about this.
Yep.
Although he finally lost office after 20 years of being a highly respected mayor because of the Rodney King riots, because he was the mayor while the city burned. Familiar theme.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question as we close this off. You've been so kind with your time, and let me warn you that I'm going to ask about North Carolina. And there's a reason I'm asking you about this. It's FEMA. It's this guarantee that the figurehead was caused to give to California, and also because you write so well and so beautifully about rural America and the reality of rural America versus what the people in the very important cities, like the center of the universe, Washington D.C., New York, the Acela Corridor, Los Angeles, think of it. I'll ask Chris about this in a second. A reminder that the Bone Frog Coffee relationship now is going on our 4th year. And we have an opportunity this year to expand Bone Frog pretty significantly. We're getting some inroads into some of the retail stores. And don't worry, we're not going to shift. We're not going to change. It's going to continue to say God Country Team on it. Tim Cruikshank, the founder of Bone Frog Coffee, is a dear friend, a brother of mine. He's a retired Navy SEAL. That stuff's not going away, not off those bags. He's not going to run from those values. But the direct sales, right now, your opportunity to lock in 15% off subscription coffee, that's something you need to take advantage of now, because as the retail pressure comes along, et cetera, things are going to change in that pricing front. So go to bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. Make sure you subscribe. They've got all sorts of blends and roasts. If you want my personal favorite, it continues to be the Goat Locker blend. Read about the Goat Locker in the Navy. It's a tradition, beautiful tradition of enlisted officers being able to have a place of their own, and even a big league admiral has to knock to come in. I love that tradition. That's a dark French roast without a hint of bitterness. It took Tim's team 3 years to get that right under the tutelage of Dave Stewart, who started Seattle's Best Coffee. So go to bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd, skip the single purchase, subscribe, and help us push into this retail world for Tim and his late wife, Liz. God rest her. It's bonefrogcoffee.com/Todd. So, Chris, very quickly, figurehead Biden was caused to say that the federal government's going to pick up the entire tab for rebuilding and taking care of California. I have no problem in helping my neighbors. I don't think you do either. In short order, Gavin Newsom said he's going to waive a bunch of red tape, et cetera, so you can build back better. And I guarantee you're going to be building back better with some smart city stuff. That's going to happen. Meanwhile, the FEMA was announcing that, hey, we're done letting you stay in hotels in North Carolina. The FEMA director just went on Fox News this weekend and didn't address any specifics other than she's very, very angry that people aren't calling the FEMA hotline and not going to FEMA help centers. It's their fault. And some people in North Carolina, in other words, about 3,000 people in the comment sections replied, the stinking help centers are closed. They were closed this weekend, not enough staffing. So you write really gloriously about urban America, and I don't know, man. I'm bothered by the comparison. You guys are getting paid off and North Carolina hurts. Does that make me a petty man?
Don't assume yet that that's going to happen. I think Joe Biden saying something is going to happen doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen.
He did say Kamala Harris could have beaten Trump.
Oh, if only she'd run.
Right.
You have to say it's winter in the Appalachians and it's snowing and 14 degrees and FEMA's saying to people who lost their houses, well, your vouchers have run out, and people are being thrown out into the snow or at immediate risk of being thrown out into the snow. And the extraordinary importance of private charity, the extraordinary importance of organizations like the Cajun Navy, the well-named Cajun Navy and Samaritan's Purse and places like that. Those are tremendously important. What's coming next in Los Angeles, when you hear people saying, oh, don't worry, we're going to cover it all and we're going to waive all the red tape. Don't believe that until you see it. We had a very large fire in Malibu something like 5 years ago, and most of the homes that were lost in that fire have not been rebuilt. We are not going to rebuild Malibu, the Palisades, Altadena quickly. That is not going to happen. 5 years from now, if you go back to those destroyed neighborhoods, you might see some houses being built. And Gavin Newsom is talking about, he's saying, oh, don't worry, we've got a plan for LA 2.0. We're going to reimagine Los Angeles. I think what that's going to mean in practice, we already have state housing laws that require cities to approve housing at much higher densities. The California legislature has been for years now at war with single-family housing.
Yes.
And wants single-family housing replaced with apartment buildings. And I think we're going to see beautiful neighborhoods of old homes. Altadena is a beautiful neighborhood. Northern Altadena, the part that burned, was a beautiful neighborhood that was built in the early 20th century and had a bunch of 100-year-old homes and more than 100-year-old homes that were absolutely beautiful homes. And they are not going to be replaced by the same kind of stately, historically interesting or culturally interesting homes. They're going to be replaced by Gavin Newsom's vision of LA 2.0. So the emergency will persist in Los Angeles generationally.
Wow, man, I wanted to say it's a cynical view. It's not, because I've been making the same prediction. And they're at war against single-family housing all up and down the West Coast. I always appreciate you joining us, Chris. This is going to be in full form on YouTube. You can share it with friends. And please do subscribe to Chris's Substack. It's important. It's chrisbray.substack.com. Appreciate your time, sir, and continue to pray for you. And I'm really glad that you're safe, you and your family. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
This is the Todd Herman Show. Please go be well, be strong, be kind, and just a little bit of a different wrap-up today. Please do pray for the people of California and North Carolina, and maybe just that God would peel the scales back from people's eyes to show them this is what human kings get you. I think a prophet named Samuel warned us about that.